Our story today is from James Herriot, Treasury of Inspirational Stories for Children. Story number 1 today will be Moses the Kitten. There have been times in the winter when I have regretted being a vet, and this looked like one of them. I had driven about 10 miles from home, thinking all the time that the dales always looked their coldest, not when they were covered with snow, but as now, when the first sprinklings streaked the bare flanks and the fells in bars and black and white, like the ribs of a crouching beast, and now in front of me was a farm gate, rattling on its hinges as the wind shook it. Brr. The car, heaterless and draughty as it was, seemed like a haven in an uncharitable world, and I gripped the wheel tightly with my woolen gloves for a few moments before opening the door. The wind almost tore the handle from my fingers as I got out, but I managed to crash the door shut before stumbling over the frozen mud to the gate. Muffled as I was in the heavy coat and scarf pulled up to my ears, I could feel the icy gust biting at my face, whipping up my nose and hammering painfully into the air spaces in my head. I had driven through and streaming-eyed was about to get back in the car when I noticed something unusual. There was a frozen pond just off the path, and among the rim-covered rushes which fringed the dead opacity of the surface, a small object stood out. It was shiny and black. I went over and looked closer. It was a tiny kitten, probably about 6 weeks old, huddled and immobile, eyes tightly closed. Bending down, I poked gently at the furry body. It must be dead. A morsel like this couldn't possibly survive in such a cold. But no, there was a spark of life because the mouth opened soundlessly for a second and then closed. Quickly I lifted the little creature and tucked it inside my coat. As I drove into the farmyard, I called to the farmer who was carrying 2 buckets out of the calf house. "I've got one of your kittens here, Mr. Butler. It must have strayed outside." Mr. Butler put down his buckets and looked blank. "Kitten? We haven't got no kittens at the present." I showed him my find, and he looked more puzzled. "Well, that's a rum 'un. There's no black cats on this spot. We've all sorts of colors, but no black 'uns." Well, he must have come from somewhere else, I thought, though I can't imagine anything so small traveling very far. It's rather mysterious. I held the kitten out, and he engulfed it with his big, work-roughened hands. "Poor little beggar. He's only just alive. I'll take him into the house and see if the missus can do out for him." In the farm kitchen, Mrs. Butler was all concerned. "Oh, what a shame!" She smoothed back the bedraggled hair with one finger. "And it's got such a pretty face." She looked up at me. "What is it, anyway? A him or a her?" I took a quick look behind the hind leg. "It's a Tom." "Right," she said. "I'll get some warm milk into him, but first of all we'll have to give him an old cure." She went over to the fireside oven on the big black kitchen range, opened the door, and popped him inside. She popped him inside? I smiled. It was the classical procedure when newborn lambs were found suffering from the cold and exposure. Into the oven they went, and the results were often dramatic. Mrs. Butler left the door partly open, and I could just see the little black figure inside. He didn't seem to care much what was happening to him. See, he's not in a hot oven. He's up here where it's nice and warm. The next hour I spent in the byre wrestling with the hind feet of a cow. The cleats were overgrown and grossly misshapen, upturned, causing the animal to hobble along on her heels. My job was to pare and hack away the excess horn, and my long held opinion that the hind feet of a cow were never meant to be handled by a man was thoroughly confirmed. We had a rope around the hock, and the leg pulled up over the beam into the roof, but the leg still pistoned back and forth while I hung on till my teeth rattled. By the time I had finished, the sweat was running into my eyes, and I had quite forgotten the cold outside. Still, I thought as easy as the kinks from my spine when I finished. There were compensations. There was a satisfaction in the sight of the cow standing comfortably on two almost normal feet. "Well, that's summat like," Mr. Butler grunted. "Come in the house and wash your hands." In the kitchen, as I bent over the brown earthenware sink, I kept glancing across the oven. Mrs. Butler laughed. "Oh, he's still with us. Come and have a look." It was difficult to see the kitten in the dark interior, but when I spotted him, I put out my hand and touched him, and he turned his head towards me. "He's coming around," I said. "That hour in there has worked wonders." "Doesn't often fail," a farmer's wife lifted him out. "I think he's a little toughen." She began to spoon warm milk into the tiny mouth. "I reckon we'll have him lapping it up in a day or two." "We're going to keep him, then?" "Too true. We are. I'm going to call him Moses." "Moses?" "Aye, you found him along the rushes, didn't you?" I laughed. "That's right. It's a good name." I was on the Butler farm about a fortnight later, and I kept looking around for Moses. Farmers rarely have their cats indoors, and I thought that if the black kitten had survived, he would have joined the feline colony around the buildings. Farm cats have a pretty good time. They may not be petted or cosseted, but it always seemed to me that they lend a free and natural life. They're expected to catch mice, but if they're not so inclined, there's abundant food at hand, bowls of milk here and there, and the dogs' dishes to be raided if anything interesting is left over. I had seen plenty of cats around today, some flitting nervously away, others friendly and purring. There was a tabby loping gracefully around the cobbles, and a big tortoiseshell was curled on a bed of straw in the warm end of the byre. Cats are connoisseurs of comfort. When Mr. Butler went to fetch some hot water, I had a quick look in the bullock house, and a white Tom regarded me placidly from behind the bars of a hayrack, where he had been taking a siesta. But there was no sign of Moses. I finished drying my arms and was about to make a casual reference to the kitten when Mr. Butler handed me my jacket. "Come around here with me if you got a minute," he said. "I've got summat to show you." I followed him through the door at the end and across the passage into the long, low-roofed piggery. He stopped at a pen about halfway down and pointed inside. "Look out," he said. I leaned over the wall, and my face must have shown my astonishment, because the farmer burst into a shout of laughter. "That's something new for you, isn't it?" "Do you see anything unusual here?" "They're not all piggies." I stared unbelievably down at the large sow, stretched comfortably on her side, suckling a litter of about 12 piglets, and right in the middle of the long, pink row of furry black and incongruous was Moses. He had a teat in his mouth and was absorbing his nourishment when the same rapt enjoyment as his smooth-skinned fellows on either side. "What the devil?" I gasped. Mr. Butler was still laughing. "I thought you'd never have seen anything like that before." "I never have. Any road." "But how did it happen? I still can't drag my eyes away." "It was the missus' idea," he replied. "When she'd got the little youth lapping milk, she took him out to find the right warm spot for him in the buildings. She settled on this pen because the sow, Bertha, had just had a litter, and I had a heater in it, and it was grand and cozy." It sounded just right. "Well, she put Moses and a bowl of milk in there," the farmer went on, "but the little feller didn't stay by the heater very long. Next time I looked in, he was round the milk bar." I shrugged my shoulders. "They say that you see something new every day at this game, but that is something I've never even heard of. Anyway, he looks well on it. Does he actually live on the sow's milk, or does he still drink from his bowl?" "Well, a bit of both, I reckon. It's hard to say. Anyway, whatever mixture Moses was getting, he was growing rapidly into a sleek, handsome animal with an unusually high gloss to his coat, which may or may not have been due to his porcine element in his diet." I never went to the butler's without having a look in the pig pen. Bertha, his foster mother, seemed to find nothing unusual in this hairy intruder, and pushed him around casually with pleasurable grunts, just as she did the rest of her brood. Moses, for his part, appeared to find the society of the pigs very congenial. When the piglets curled up together and settled down for a sleep, Moses would be somewhere in the heap, and when his young colleagues were weaned at 8 weeks, he showed his attachment to Bertha by spending most of his time with her. And it stayed that way over the years. Often he would be right inside the pen, rubbing himself happily along the comforting bulk of the sow. But I remember him best in his favorite place, crouching on the wall, looking down, perhaps meditatively, on what had been his first warm home. Thanks for joining me.